All right.
Hello.
You're over here. How you doing? Good to see you.
Just anywhere. Where you're.
I told them you were out there. I said I saw her, but she was also circling the parking lot like I was, so.
Yes.
Then I told them a story about you running from the train in Italy with your walking stick.
All right, we will call our meeting to order. And I would like to thank you for attending the work session. I would also like to remind you that school board meetings in Nebraska are meetings held in public, not public meetings. During the public comment section, the public may address the board on agenda items and other miscellaneous topics. I also just wanted to acknowledge that we have Senator Jacobson here to observe our work session today, and we're very appreciative of him taking the time to do that. We review the purpose and direction of the school district. So the purpose of North Platte Public School District is to prepare all students to be productive, responsible citizens in a safe, caring, supportive learning environment. Our direction is to prepare every student for success through high-quality educational programs delivered by highly effective educators who use innovative research-based strategies in a safe, supportive environment in collaboration with family, businesses, and community members. Sheila, can I get roll call, please?
Joanna Green,
Present.
Emily Garrett,
Present.
Matthew Peterson,
Present.
Angela Lacy. Present. Skip Baltic.
Present.
Cindy O'Connor.
Present.
All right, we will move on to the public comment portion of our meeting. So we'll give that just 1 second.
And before we do that, since this is more informal, can we just invite him to the table?
I think we'll just let him observe from the audience, but yeah. So public questions and comments may take place at this time in the agenda. Individuals who want to address the board must complete a guidelines for public comments form with the date, topic addressing, name, address, and the name of any organization you represent, and give it to the board clerk prior to the meeting. Sheila.
Yes, Senator Jacobson.
All right, we'll turn some time over to you.
As all of you know, we just completed the special session. It did end yesterday. Mercifully ended yesterday. I got to tell you, that was I'd anticipated some of what we're going to run into in the special session when you've got term limited senators. You had senators that were up for re-election. Anybody that watched any of it, and those of you who did, I feel bad for you. But it was rough, and there were times when I began to wonder: are we in a sandbox here? Are we in on the floor of the legislature. So it got frustrating. And anybody who knows me very well knows that my wife is shocked that I've had the patience to do some of that stuff. But let me just give you a couple of highlights. I want to give you an idea of where we were through the special session, kind of where public schools are through all that, and kind of where we are moving forward. I know I reached out to Dr. Rhodes and Stewart earlier to really, I want to meet with them in particular, and then also all the other schools in the district to really kind of get a better idea of where you sit, where we're likely going to be moving, and where the guardrails need to be as we move forward. One of the big things we did with LB 34 is LB 34 put spending, and it didn't put spending caps on, it put taxing authority caps on cities and counties. It did not touch school districts, but it was cities and counties. They're not real happy about the fact that they have spending caps. I have your spending caps and school districts do not. And so this will be a discussion as we move into the next session in the 108th legislature. I can tell you that what's happening with cities and counties is the caps are how much they can raise their property tax ask year over year. It does not cap any of their other revenue sources or any of their spending. You can get revenue somewhere else, cities and counties, that's fine. You're just going to be limited on what you can ask from the property taxpayer. Okay, and so we ended up with an index that they wanted, which is like called SLICE. It's basically state and local consumption numbers. It's a little bit higher in most years over CPI. I still like CPI because that's where your taxpayers are at. As we know, retirees that are collecting Social Security is tied to CPI. So my concern and the pushback I got from a lot of cities and counties, and I got a lot of emails on this one, was, well, we don't know if we can make this work. And so my response to them was, so tell me about the retiree that's on a fixed income and their Social Security goes up 1% because that's what the CPI was, and you're telling me you need 3. And then you're telling me you can't adjust, but they're supposed to. How does that work? Okay. Well, we might have some things that come up. I understand that. That's what reserves are for. Okay. You also have the ability to, in their cases, so you know, they're limited to an increase of the greater of 0 or this index plus real growth. Real growth would be growth not due to existing property tax increases, but to new construction, annexation, and it would also include TIF projects that have not gone on the tax rolls. Okay, so that would be real growth. You would also have a carve out. They have a carve out for public safety, and that carve out is pretty big. Okay, and it's not overly well defined. I'll be honest, but I think the way this got done was more with the meat cleaver than it was with the scalpel. Already visited with Senator Von Gellern, who will likely be the revenue chair next year. I plan to be the banking chair and then be on the revenue committee and next year. So we've already talked about, we're gonna have to be prepared to get our scalpels out and fix some of the things that occurred that need to change. Now, why were school districts left out of this? Well, first and foremost, school districts are a whole different animal, okay? An entirely different animal. First and foremost, let's look at the fact that you have to rely almost exclusively on tax dollars, either from the state, the federal government, or local taxpayers. Where cities and counties have inheritance tax revenues, they have their fees, cities have local option sales tax, they have municipal light and water, they've got other revenue sources that are out there that are different than public schools. The thought by being able to try to front load and bring in more state funding for public schools, the idea was the fact that over the years, when we ask ourselves, why are we in the property tax mess we are? And I would argue that it really kind of goes back to what's happened over the years with the TIOSA formula. Okay, one by one, the previous legislatures have repealed different items from being subject to sales tax. So as those got repealed, and they no longer subject to sales tax, state brought in less money. Along with that, the POSA formula never got adjusted. So what happened is all the rural schools pretty much are out, okay? Because as you guys well know, POSA is based on revenues, or what your resources are and what your needs are. Well, as your resources go up, you get kicked out. Okay, so you get kicked out of POSA, you get no state money or very little state money. You're going to get it through SPED and a few other free and reduced lunch and some federal stuff, but otherwise you're getting it all from the local property taxpayer. So that's how we got into the problem we have now. And it really started with the repeal of all these sales taxes. If every sales tax, every item that was subject to sales tax at one time and has been repealed would be on the sales tax rolls today, we would have collected over $7 billion in sales taxes. Instead, in 2023, we collected 2.3 billion. So where would our property taxes be if we could have taken those dollars and put it into the POSA formula, bought down what it cost taxpayers, local taxpayers to support their public schools? Where would we be? Okay, right now, I know what we have, 27, some roughly schools that receive POSA funding. Okay. Equalization. Yeah, and equalization aid. So when you look at Lincoln Public, for example, I think they're very close to getting kicked off equalization aid because of the growth in the base that they have. OPS, they're there forever, and the bulk of the money goes to OPS. Does OPS want to change anything? Well, of course not. Why would they? And oh, by the way, how many state senators represent OPS and Lincoln? You don't want to know the answer to that question. Okay. So it's always been why I've been so adamantly opposed to having tax, because we don't have the numbers, folks. I mean, if the dollars get pulled here and go to Lincoln, getting that money back here is going to be very, very difficult. And that's why I've been very, very concerned about that. I've also been concerned when we talked about how do we bring something that would involve public schools and higher funding. The beginning point was pretty simple. We were going to come in with the base that you have, your previous year, take your existing base load, so everybody get their existing budget. But the challenge becomes, of course, how do we make those increases over time? You can't just come in and say, well, it's going to be CPI, or it's going to be slice, or it's going to be some index, because your numbers are going to move around and your needs are going to move around. So we can talk about, well, let's go back and modify POSA, where we eliminate the resources in the POSA formula and just look at the needs. Okay, and that's probably the direction we're going to head. But then what do we need to tweak on those needs? And one of them is the averaging formula, which I know you guys, I know Stuart, you're heavy into that, Todd. So of course, Lincoln and Omaha want averaging, right? Because their cost per pupil is lower. So that drives up what they get in equalization aid because they're averaging all the other larger school districts. Okay. So obviously most of us in the rural areas would say, let's kick that out. Okay. Like need a little pushback from the urban areas. But I think that's where the big discussion points are going to occur, is how do we make sure that we've got a formula in place that will deal with how do we handle growth. And as you guys all well know, and I've been very clear on this in the past, we have a teacher shortage today. So if we're going to attract and retain quality teachers, we've got to pay them. Okay, so we can't compromise that along the process. Now, that gets you back to then where do you control the costs? Well, and I'm just going to be straight up with you that ultimately we've got to take a hard look at our administrative costs. We've got to take a look at our costs that are controllable, and there aren't a lot of them. I get it. Large, but 80% of your budget roughly is salaries, benefits. So it's a small number up here, but that number has got to be managed. And I would really encourage you, if I would give you any piece of advice, is be prepared to manage that 20%. Because that's going to be critical as to what we do down the road. I did meet with Hershey Public Schools before the special session. They reached out to me, wanted to meet with me. We had a conversation a little bit about the net transfer program. and what's going on with, net transfer students. I think they've assured me that they are no longer going to be taking any new net transfer students, that they feel like that they've reached a point to where they now have right-sized their school to their teaching staff and so on to the students that are there today. But I am concerned, and I think one thing this board probably is going to need to continue to do is identify what's happening with the loss of students. I think you've lost, what, 500 students here in the last 6 years. So we've got to look at that and say, how are we going to curb the loss of students? And if you're losing students, if you think about any future formulas, you're going to be losing state aid. You're losing it now through equalization. I mean, obviously, as your resources went up, you had about a 10% increase a year ago. Okay, so an increase in property values going up a year ago reduced the equalization aid because your resources went up. But what compounded it is you lost students. So you lost equalization aid because you lost students. And so consequently, you ended up having to leave the mill levy relatively flat, and you ended up with a significant increase in property taxes. Okay, so that's a tough one. Okay, so I realized that the loss of equalization aid was what on the resources side was uncontrollable. But what is controllable is what you can do on the student side, because as you lose that, you've really got to take a hard look at, okay, what does that do in terms of overhead? What kind of overhead cuts can we make? What are some other cuts we can make to be able to make up for the loss of students? Or get that to reverse and go the other way. Hopefully with the packing plant here, we're going to see more student influx. That'll bring its own challenges, but it'll also bring you additional TIOSA funding, simply because you're going to probably look at ESL students and so on. That will help with your formula. So what I'm trying to figure out between now and now in the regular session is where the pressure points are as we tweak things moving forward. What's going to have the best outcome for the school districts, public school districts in District 42 throughout. And so that's going to be the big challenge. But right now, through special session, there will be no changes as we move into next year. But as we get into the next session, trust me, there will be a lot of discussions about public schools, and I want to make sure that we have the right outcomes. There'll also be a lot of tweaks that we're going to have to make. I did meet with Glenn Rex and John Cannon with the league and with NACO. They caught me just as I was walking out from the Sinai I vote, and I let them know that I have worked with Brad Von Giller, and we're going to come back with scalpels to kind of fix any issues that occurred with the cities and counties. I know there's some tweaks we're going to have to make there, but I really, when it comes to dealing with school districts, we're going to have to be pretty accurate with what we're doing on the front end. The tweaks afterwards are harder to do because we're doing it after the fact, and you guys are trying to deal with some aftermath. So we've got to do that with our eyes wide open on the front end. So that's where we are. I do think for some people said, gosh, the special session had to be kind of disappointing. I would tell you it was. But one of the big things we accomplished was the caps were critical to the governor's plan. We also we'll be front loading the 1107 credits. That'll all happen next year. So you'll actually see that credit on your property tax statement. So you'll be paying less on the front end, where now you've got to go out and apply for that on your income tax return. But the other thing we did was when we looked at the sales tax exemptions, what really happened is all the progressives in the body pretty much just said, we're no on anything that repeals, either raises taxes or repeals certain sales tax items. And then you had enough Republicans in the body, conservatives, particularly the hard right conservatives, who they weren't interested in doing anything with taxes. The numbers just weren't there. I mean, we weren't going to be able to reach a compromise. Now, I will tell you, I've already met with several of the progressives in the body about what are some things we need to do to work together next year to get a bill that can pass. I think we talked about a number of sales tax repeals that I think everybody's fine with, pool cleaning, some of those kinds of things that aren't going to impact low income people. There are a lot of things that we can bring on. I said at the beginning when a reporter asked me about this is really an aggressive proposal about 120 sales tax items that will be repealed. You know, what do you think? And I said, well, I think the governor came in with pretty aggressive. I said classic order steak and look for a hamburger, and we did get a hamburger. It's unfortunately, it's more of a McDonald's hamburger than it is a Whopper, so. But that's really all I've got. I'd entertain any questions if you have. Thanks for the invitation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we will move on to the budget workshop, and the first thing that I wanted to do, Cindy, I'm sorry, but you didn't get to take part in this last time since you missed our first work session. So we're gonna review real quick. So, at our last work session, I asked everybody to just kind of give some thoughts on what they hoped as far as outcome from the budget. And so these were the things, I asked each board member to share, so I'll give you just a minute to think about that. But I would like you to give your input as well as what you're hoping for out of our budget, so. So, and it just needs to be just a simple statement. So we've got, provide quality education in the most efficient manner possible. Money more directly towards students, back to basics, things that directly impact student learning, keep all programs and activities for all students, and hoping for a consensus to do what's best for all students and staff. So what thoughts would you add? It's going on the wall.
Going on the wall.
It makes it feel better, Joanne asked the question, she had to think of all this.
Well, I did have the answer to this.
I mean, to me, for schools, it's all about the students.
Okay, so I'm just gonna put that on. Good answer.
I mean, that's what we're here for.
Yep.
Yep, good answer.
Seems like we
Okay,
have.
all right,
So is that it?
that's all I need.
Oh, wow, that's easy.
Good
So, so then the other thing that I wanted to do is just to give anybody, if you felt like your statement that you made last time, if it needs any clarification, if you'd like to add anything to it, just for the purpose of our discussion today. All right, so I actually did prepare something this morning I'm gonna add to mine just a little bit. So one of the things that I wanted to mention in hoping that we can find a consensus today is that I feel like in the time that I've been on the board, which has been about 10 years, that we've seen a lot of positive momentum in our school district. I came on the board when we had our interim superintendent and then was here when we hired Dr. Hanson, who started a lot of really great things for our school district. One thing that some people may not be aware of if you haven't been around for a while is that we did not have curriculum that was aligned. And so if you went to our different elementary schools, you could have a different experience. And so that was one of the things that Dr. Hanson did that I really appreciate, is that he brought all of that together so that all of our students have the same opportunities no matter which elementary school that you go to. We also took some of the workload of, we had, 3 or 4 people that did about 10 different things. And so even though it has raised our administrative costs a little bit, I think that some of those positions have really helped us to be able to focus on student needs and focus on the achievement outcomes and being able to serve our students. I also love that we added an ag program to the high school. In the time that I've been on the board, that we have added the FFA program, the automotive program has been brought back. We have 2 foreign languages now. When I went to high school here, we had 4 or 5, I can't remember. And so I know that was really interesting to me to see coming back, that we only had one, that we had
Yeah.
that we had changed our services that much. So it's nice that we have the two back. We have the growing internship program, they actually added quite a few courses to the high school this year too, which I thought was really exciting, because I think that just shows that we're able to serve students better, to serve students in their individual interests a little bit better, which helps them be more engaged in school, which I think helps us to have better outcomes overall and also increase our graduation rates, because when you have kids that are engaged, then they want to be there and they see the reason for them being there. I love that we've added girls wrestling and boys baseball this last year. And I think that we're starting to see a lot of positive outcomes, even with our school resources and school resource officers and the dean of student positions that we have. So lots of positives. And so one of the things that we all went to the area membership meeting last night, and one of the things that was brought up by Colby during his session was that our budget should be a reflection of the priorities and expectations of our community. And that's one of the things that we as board members get to do, is we get to help the administration know those things so that they can set the direction for our school district. So I took a minute this morning and I listed a couple of things, and I'm gonna ask, as I write my list, I'm gonna ask you guys to think, so that if there's anything that I left off, but so that can be part of our discussion today. So we know, one of the things that we know is that we don't want property taxes to increase. So I'll write that and cross out increase. We don't want property taxes. That's one of the things that you hear a lot in the community. We want growth in student achievement. And this is something that the board has, and we talked about this last time too, that we would like to increase our cash reserves. Because we have had to take out a line of credit, which we appreciate that has been an option for us. But we really would like to increase our cash reserves. We have talked about the growth of our community and growth of our and also diversity is increasing in our community. I sat with the EL ladies at the welcome back to school, and we're going to be well over 100 in our EL population this year. And so that's something that we need to keep an eye on. And also student behaviors, and I'm just going to put safety and security, because I think that has been an ongoing topic, not only in our school district, but in schools everywhere. So is there anything else that anybody feels like we need to add to that list that maybe you've heard that I didn't think of this morning as I was making my list?
I think that safety and security and student behaviors is the number one thing that, like, if a parent sees me at a grocery store, or, you know, somebody has left our district and they are expressing their concern about why, that is almost always the reason that I hear as a board member. And I can relate to those concerns as a former teacher also. I think that is probably the majority of the reason I left the profession. So I definitely agree with that, probably in our community's mind at the forefront of conversation priority rights. That impacts ours. Those are the two things I think.
Anybody else have anything to add?
It's pretty inclusive.
think at the end of the day, I mean, what I hear from people, they just want their students to get a good education. I mean, yes, there are. I think all these things are part of that, but data, I mean, like Cindy said, this is why we're here, is for our students, and we want to provide a quality education for our students.
Well, and that was one thing, Cindy and I attended a session that John Spots put on last night, and he was talking about how Nebraska compares to other districts. And we're actually in the top 10 in a lot of, good ways. And so I think that was really positive to hear that Nebraska and the things that we do here in Nebraska does provide our students with good education. So the challenge is just for us to continue doing that. So, so finally, before I turn the time over to Stuart, I just want to remind the board that our role is to help set the direction and expectations for the school district. We govern through policy and oversight, and this means that we make sure that the budget is managed and spent according to the goals that have been set. We hired Dr. Rhodes to manage the details of how those funds are spent. And therefore, if there's questions about how those funds are spent, then those questions need to be directed to him. I just also want to acknowledge that, especially in the political climate that we're under, that our administration faces a lot of scrutiny, and they're under a lot of pressure, and I appreciate that they have such a willingness to have open conversations with us. I'm told often how not only how good we have it with Stuart as our business manager, but also that we, in a lot of cases as a board, are more informed than a lot of other boards are as far as the operations within our school district and how funds are spent. And so I just want our administration to know how much that's appreciated. So, all right, Stuart.
All right, we're going to try to share my screen and try to do the PowerPoint, but what, so can I do this job? Yeah, I can. I am going to stop sharing at individual points because we really want to get your thoughts before we move on through this PowerPoint, because we really want to get your direction. So first and foremost, number one, thank you everybody for bringing your documents. We provided some extra ones. So if you have some notes on the previous one, I'm sorry. But in it, if you had notes, you know, I just want to remind you, when we were first looking at the valuations, it was at 10.7%. We did receive our certified valuations Monday, and they're only at, you know, it's only, so we can say it's a positive, but it's at 8.64%. So we've decreased a little bit on certified valuation. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this PowerPoint. Second of all, I think some of our norms that we have to identify is that we are not doing the joint public hearing no matter what. Dr. Rhodes and I have been monitoring that. Now with our certified valuations, we do have a number that we want, no matter what, want to be under, because we're going to make sure that we do not go through the joint public hearing this year. The county has given us a different document besides what is in our auditor of public accounts information. But we have to complete that too, but we will ensure no matter what, as we get through today, not have a joint public hearing. Third is that with the discussion today, before we conclude, we want to make sure we have a direction with property taxes and our budget of expenditures so that we can set all the specific requirements that we have to do for Board of Education and the district. And I'll go through that a little bit. Finally, at the committee of the whole here in August, you know, once we have that direction, we will make sure that we bring that information back to you, the committee of the whole, and just sort of take you through a little bit of the documents. So with that, we just want,
Real quick,
yeah,
on the valuation change, have you ever seen it change that significantly?
no,
It
I have
seems
not. I
Like
have
quite
not.
a bit of. a change.
And-
Yeah,
And I don't get the we get the detail on the preliminary, but we don't see the detail on the final. It only gives us three numbers, total budget, real growth, and then, another number, and it's not coming to me at this point in time, but we never see the detail. The only time we'll see the detail is coming in October when they have, the reset of the valuations for the state aid calculation. And then at that point in time, we'll see a few changes and we can see a little bit more detail, but not to the extent that the county gives us in June.
Okay.
Good question. So just reminder, and I had developed some of these slides before the certified valuation. And I did go through and edit accordingly, but our certified valuations were due yesterday. Because of the Telegraph, because of when the bulletin publishes, and trying to determine, can we have enough time and get it in, because we have to have that published 5 days before we hold the hearing. We have now chosen to put off until September 9th. You know, talking with Sheila and the dynamics now of what we have to do for publishing, not only our meeting notices, but our claims. Trying to go through that process. This will give us at least a little bit of time so we can know when we have to get it in and how it has to be, because this is a new, sort of a new venture for us in regards to publication. So with that, the budget of expenditure hearing will occur on September 9th, property tax hearing on September 9th. Because if we don't have a joint public hearing, the only thing we have to do is have a hearing on property taxes.
Which, just a note about that, that's the night of our regular Board of Education
right.
meeting, so.
Right,
That's what I was just looking at.
yeah,
Nice.
thank you.
I
Thank
saw
you.
everybody kind of pulling out calendars.
What?
To make that. note.
Well, we start that at
And
the
that-
same time.
We'll start it at the same time. We'll just say all our hearings are before, similar to what we do when we have the other ones.
yeah.
So when we post that, we'll post the budget of expenditure hearing at 5:30, property tax hearing at 5:30, and the regular board meeting will follow. So there'll be 3 postings of notifications along with the 1-page budget, right? That'll need to go in. And we say a 5-day, it's 4-day requirement based on the day that you can't use both the day that it's published and the day of the meeting. So it's actually 4 days from the time it's posted. And we thought maybe we could get it in Saturday, but we did not want to take that chance and no.
I don't deal with real people anymore. It's an online thing.
Yeah.
On .us.
Right.
But it would have had to go in Saturday's Telegraph to meet the statutory timelines of 4 days. And we
And
just,
they
we didn't want to take
require-
that chance.
A lead time at least 2 to 3 days before then. So just knowing all the leads as well as publication.
Someone from California now verified.
Exactly.
Something in the North Plateau.
That's exactly
I'm like,
correct.
Yeah.
the person in California is citing an affidavit, then we publish something here.
Right.
Okay, whatever.
And then we'll have 2 action items within the budget document, noting that by September 30th, the auditor of public accounts document that I have to plug into, and it's a multiple spreadsheet. We have to upload that information to the state auditor, along with other items by September 30th. So just sort of dates that we keep in mind as we go through this. So thank you very much so as you look at this document and remember when we got down to probably the 3rd page from the end where we talked about taxes and projected levies. Now, reminding you that we don't set the levy, we just know where it's going to be, but we don't do that. But we try to at least predict what it's going on. We had first came with you, and we're calling out our workshop on July 16th. We showed you where our general fund, building fund, and QC Pup was last year, where we're gonna be this year for our property taxes. For our property taxes for each of those funds, and the variance for each one, for example, the general fund was 1.2. The QC Puff was dropping by 755,000. That was because we're at the end of our bonds for our QC Puff, and so we have two more payments, one in December of 24, one in December of 25. And then we'll be concluding those bonds in the QC Puff. So that's why you're seeing that one, because when you set the levy for the QC Puff and you don't set the levy, when you set the property tax request, that'll begin in January, collected through December of 25. So that's how this structure works for collection of the bonds. So with that, on the next page, I posted in your document, we were using some estimated, now we're dealing with our current valuation. And in that, the levy for the general fund based upon our property tax requests that we had put together in the budget document, the levy was, and we'll just use total. I'm not gonna break it out right now between anything. 0.98 dropping down from $1.05 at this point in time for North Platte Public Schools. So when you look at the levies for a household, as you take a look at this piece of information, a $200,000 house last year would have paid $2,110. Everybody was saying they saw like a 10% increase in their house value. So we used that for just, calculation purposes, because we know multiple residences across the city went up. So we just took 10%, increased it by 10%, and said, if we use this levy, our total overall property tax request on a $220,000 house would be $2,168. To just give you a perspective as we move forward. So with that, that's why I said I was going to stop sharing and just sort of get your thoughts. Okay, what did I do?
Yeah.
Stop sharing.
I stopped sharing. Okay, good enough. I see it on the screen, I just didn't see it up there. So anyway, I stopped sharing just to get your thoughts in regards to this as we move forward. No matter what, we're ensuring that we're below the overall tax request compared to a joint public hearing. I mean, that I always want to say that, but then I wanted to get your thoughts as we move forward on the PowerPoint.
Can you remind us real quick what that 1% treasurer's fee is?
It's a requirement within the state that any public entity that levies property taxes, there's an automatic 1%, we'll just say a collection fee by the county treasurer that is added on. So when we look at our total property tax authority, that we have to be at or under, that includes the 1% county treasurer fee. So it's already built in. So when we talk about our total overall taxes, when we want to look at the joint public hearing or anything else, we have to include the 1%. So if it's $100,000, $1,000 has to be added on for calculation purpose of a levy. Is that, yeah, anything?
I think that's
Yeah.
good question.
So what's our increase? Because I know that these numbers are not the most updated numbers. What is our increase on, obviously, I know there's a decrease in levy with this proposal, but what is our amount increase on our tax ask? $500,000, is that right?
On
445,000, is that the right number?
Yeah, it would be 445,000.
Okay, so
Total
it is
tax
correct.
ask, yes. Based upon this, the levy did change about a penny because of the change in valuation.
Okay.
Which-
And what's the growth percentage increase on that from where we were before?
Are you
Does
talking
that fall
about
within the cap that the state has set as
Oh.
far as allowable growth there?
Good question. So on the property tax authority, no matter what, as we talk through this process, right now, this is above where the tax ask would be, and that would be, if you flip back a page, Emily and everybody else. The property tax authority, based upon what the state has set, we would have to be at 29,453,000. Obviously, with the general fund and the building fund, we're above that. So we would have to then come to the board to ask for additional property tax authority above and beyond this number. You can go up to 5%. No matter what, and in that, we would have to say that based upon this number, and I'm just going to roughly look at the calculators. Quickly doing this. And of course, my calculator won't work really quickly. I know. 1, 2. That would only be 2.6% additional increase in taxes going into that 5%. So roughly, we would request 2.5% of those additional tax.
In addition to the 3, whatever percent of this.
In addition to where the calculation comes.
Okay, so you'd be asking for roughly a 5.5% increase.
Well, actually, the overall tax request is going down, based upon this calculation, and once again, I'll reference a little bit with, Senator Jacobson, based upon how they looked at our total revenue in 21-22 to 22-23. They said you received an additional 500,000 in revenue, so we're gonna decrease your property tax revenue, even though we may not see that additional 500,000 in 24-25. It dropped it by 500,000. So number one, also, besides trying to get up to where we were last year, we're $500,000 short. Am I making sense there? Meaning that we were at 29.9, now they're saying we only can be at 29.4, or $500,000 reduced off property taxes automatically.
But there's potential that $500,000, we'll see that on the state end again, correct? Because that's why that was reduced off of our property tax authority, was because we received that funding elsewhere. I know that's a very simplified version of what happened, but just so I'm understanding, if there's a possibility that we see that $500,000 on the other end of the equation.
No.
Okay.
Because what it is that, what they do is they say, they look at your, non-property tax revenue, which the number was 3.5 to 3.6. So you can look at the two numbers. You look at the SPED reimbursement coming in, and we acknowledge that we have the SPED reimbursement. But then when you look at the KIOSA funding, there's roughly $400,000 reduced. So they're saying, based upon, we'll calculate your total budget, but then we're going to reduce off where you have what you have. You're going to get $500,000. 500. You should get 500,000 more, but our TIOSA fund or our SPED funding should be now flat compared to last year because yes, we're increasing a little bit on SPED, but overall reimbursement should now all of a sudden flatten out like you're seeing on non-property tax.
Okay, I have one more question and then I
No,
will
you're fine.
stop asking
No.
other people. Do you have an option to present to the board that does not require us to have a supermajority vote to override that growth cap, because I'm just not sure. Based on last year, like, I'm not sure that the votes are there
Right.
to pass that, so I want to make sure that we have a
I
backup
think
plan.
I'll go ahead and address that. First, I think if you look at total property tax asking for 23-24, and you compare that to what is proposal, the July 16th proposal, that is a 1.5% increase in that total dollar amount. It's, we were at 30,979, 437 for 23-24. The 24-25 proposal number one, or proposal A or plan A, is $31,424,900, or $424,988. So that's 1.5% increase in terms of total tax asking of dollars. Now, to answer your question, Stuart and I have spent a lot of hours together since the 16th, and we do have several proposals to place in front of you. I think we want to talk about any of the pitfalls that the district may have with one or other in terms of future budgets is probably the greater impact that could be more on a negative situation. So we wanted to make sure that we reviewed what we did on the 16th with you and clarify any questions that you may have. We do have a plan that I think Stuart probably is ready to present that keeps the tax asking neutral. So when we say that we asked for 30,979,000, a few odd dollars last year, we have a plan that is keeping that neutral. And so we would not be raising taxes necessarily. But that is all levies. That's all levies combined. That is your general fund, your building fund, and your QC fund. And so to your question, yes, we have a few different proposals to put in front of you. And I think then as a board, after we present those, then we need questions that you have on, you know, both the positive and negative effects from any of these plans that we put in front of you, so that by the time we get to the September 9th, we're all good with what we're proposing and where we're going to be.
So
Yeah,
just
thank you for that.
to clarify, because I think I'm confused now. You had this $445,000. That Stuart said something about a 2.6% increase, and then you said something about 1.5.
The 2.6% increase is the additional in terms of LB 243
Okay.
and how that statute reads to access additional property tax funds from this formula.
Okay.
And so what Stuart is saying, you're not going to access 5%.
Mhm.
He's saying to meet this particular proposal, it would be 2.6% above the 29,453,000 that is on that page. This formula tells us as a school district, here's what you can levy for taxes. And then LB 243 build in the super majority vote for school districts to access additional funds. We're at 5%. I think your little class Ds are 7%. They can access a little bit more. So that's what Stuart was talking about. I'm talking about total tax dollars from
Yes.
23-24 to 24-25.
Okay.
That it would be a 1.5% increase in the tax dollar asking of our patrons, property owners.
Okay, that makes the 2.6 would be referenced that property tax request authority that we have under the formulas.
Yep.
Okay.
The 2.6 is what would be above the 29,453,000, right around there on that.
296, but you know.
Yeah, right there,
Yeah,
right there.
Yeah, round.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
No, and this is why I paused at various points, because no matter what, we wanted to have somewhat of this discussion moving forward so that we had everything out on the table. So when we're talking about the budget, we've gotten everything out, we've moved forward, and we know where we'll, as Dr. Rhodes said, be on September 9th
So
with
then-
the board.
If we can then maybe look at that's obviously the property tax request. Can we then look at that compared to the budget? Because this goes back to something the senator was saying is we may be reducing our budget, but we're still potentially looking at a property tax increase because we're getting less state dollars and our only other option is to go to property tax payers.
Because valuation.
Because valuations went up because we.
The last, well, 2 years.
Last 2 years ago, well, last
Yeah.
year valuations went up 10%, and we know we lost. In calculation on the TIOSA formula, 2.7 million.
Right.
State aid. What roughly after,
And part of that's valuations, part of that is decrease in enrollment.
probably part of that is the decrease enrollment. Was part of it, but we saw an increase in the local effort rate, which then increased our needs a little bit more, so it counteracted a little bit of the decrease. But luckily, we had increase in poverty money this last year, which extremely helped us counteract a little bit of the state aid. But then bottom line is that we still lost 500,000 in state aid. So,
And I think
and we'll.
that's I think the problem that we have is communicating that message to our patrons, because if we go in and say, even if we have a reduced budget, we may still have an increased tax ask.
That side of the revenue potentially is
and-
increased.
And so that's where I think lay people understandably struggle to understand that. It's like, well, if you're reducing your budget, then how are you asking for more property taxes? Well, because we have less state aid, and so our only option.
You said what, 2.6 in the last 2 years?
No, just over last year. From last year, from the 23-24 state aid to 24-25. The local effort rate calculation based upon a 10% increase in valuation, we lost 2.7 million in state aid because that was saying in the TIOSA formula, it should go back to your patrons.
Yeah.
And that is on page. You'll look at this page if you want to. That will show you sort of some of the discussion that.
What page?
I'm sorry, it's not calculated, but it will probably be 2 more pages where you currently are, Angela. No, flip forward. Yep, 1 page forward.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
You got it.
That down.
Okay.
No,
Good,
right.
good.
Although you're doing sideways graphs.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So you can see that, based upon the TIOSA formula, and the increase in valuations, it could have been a 2.7 decrease, but, in that with the counteractive poverty money, as well as even though we lost, 25 students based upon the TIOSA formula, our local, our basic funding went up by 700,000, which extremely helped us too. And that's based upon our tier schools.
But still at the 2.6 million loss.
Yeah.
So it would have been higher without.
It would have been higher had we not got poverty money and that. And before we conclude today, I just want to make a comment about, where our poverty money will be next year based upon information. Which plays into account on our budget and our state aid.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So if we went, just obviously theoretically here, looking at the numbers from July 16th, we'd be looking at a 2.6% reduction in our budget, but still having to ask for a 1.5% increase in our tax ask over last year. Is that accurate?
Yes, and a lot of that is relative to a reduction in our grants. Because now we don't have ESSERs anymore, we're starting to phase that out. So in that, we're getting back down to where we were back in 2019. So that we can say, we don't have that ESSER money. So now our grants are rebalancing back out to where we're going to be about 5.5, 5.7. And that's all contingent upon IDEA and our ESSA programs are the two bigger drivers.
So I would just maybe recommend or caution the board and Stuart, certainly counter this if you don't think this is the right direction. But when I've worked with the boards in the past, I've always kept that grant over here. I think grants do fall within your general fund budget, but they're a little bit uncontrollable from the standpoint of the type of grants you're getting. So ARC funds, ESSER, all those dollars, quite honestly, for some school superintendents, we were like, government, keep your money. Because it threw us for a loop a little bit to have those. Now, Stuart's done a really nice job in the district of allocating those grant funds as it relates to ESSER, to McDonald Project, Adams, Eisenhower. So we did some facility upgrades through that. But what some districts did as well is they put personnel into those grants. And I would tell you, other than IDEA and Title I grants, I'm always a little bit leery about putting personnel in those grants, because if the grants go away, then as a district, you have to decide how you're going to move those people within your general fund. So that is what has happened with your ESSER funds in particular. We put some counselors in ESSER funds. We put some nurses in ESSER funds. We put social worker in ESSER funds, all very, very needed positions. But over the course of the last few years, we've had to figure out how we embed those people or move them over to general fund numbers. And so I would just, as you move forward, looking at this budget or future budgets, I would just say, keep your grants kind of off to the side. Now, Stuart on his spreadsheets always has less grants as it relates to revenue, less grants as it relates to expenditures. Whatever you bring in for grants, you have to spend. That's an automatic in and out. So I've always moved those to a different column and just studied your revenue streams that are local and state. And so your sped reimbursement, your state aid, your property tax, all your other local receipts that you bring in. So I think, Matt, that doesn't paint a true picture on a total budget when you include grant dollars in there, because we're seeing a reduction in the amount of grants. So you might move from 8 million to 5 million from the previous year and think, oh my gosh, we're down that revenue stream. Well, we are, but it went out. I mean, it's in and out money. It isn't quite the same as that, even though it's an expenditure through general fund dollars, your general fund, it's a receipt, and an expenditure, it's in and out money. You gotta spend it through your general fund. But I think it's hard when you look at your total budget dollars to make a decision around, have we reduced our expenditures? Are we increasing our expenditures? Are we increasing revenue? Are we decreasing revenue with that in there? So what I try and do is take that grants out and leave it over here, then look at those percentages of increase, decrease on both expenditure and revenue sides of things. Does that, was a lot.
Yeah, no,
Does that make sense?
Absolutely it did.
Okay.
Well, and it's kind of, so and this is coming from other experiences with grants too, that are allocated towards certain things and not forever money, obviously.
Right.
But it kind of puts you in an interesting pickle, because you don't want to necessarily decrease your revenues over here because you have these grants. So then you don't necessarily want to apply these grants to expenses that are going to be forever expenses. I'm wondering if there's a way, and this is just because I know enough about grants to be dangerous, that's it. Is there a way that some of that grant money could go towards expenses that were possibly there before, with us then taking some of that money we would have spent on those expenses and being able to set it aside in our reserves without necessarily decreasing too much over here? But instead of going out and trying to spend grant money on new things, are there ways that we can be smarter about applying it to things we already need to spend?
Those are the things that Stuart and I have worked on the last 10 days, reallocating grant funds to pay for things within the general fund.
Okay, because I think there's
To
a
reduce, to
temptation,
potentially reduce
right?
what we're gonna ask for property tax dollars. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Cause I know when you, like, if somebody gets a big grant for something, it's easy to be like, oh, we should do this and this and
Right.
this, but if some of that could go towards offsetting things we already needed to be doing, I think that would be really helpful.
And
Good
we
point.
I try to, as we see the grants coming in, it's quicker reimbursement for staff, so I try to offshoot, maybe a staff person that we can put in there that would be relative. So for example, as Dr. Rhodes mentioned, a social worker, I was able to work with NDE and embed that into our title grant program. So we try to look at employees and can we embed them in one. The bad part about it is, like, for example, on some of them, the grants don't come in until after our July 16th meeting, and then all of a sudden we're trying to figure out those dollar amounts in a shorter time period, but we're getting there.
It could be a long-term effect than if you did that, and I understand that makes perfect sense to me. But if the grant goes away.
Right.
And you have these people here, then you have to find the money from the general.
Yeah, if you want to keep people in program.
Right, okay,
Great questions. Anything else?
Reminding and purchase services category, that's gonna be a lot of stuff we like utilities and those kind of things. Is that gonna fall into that?
I haven't really remembered. I brought it, so it's. The one thing I was gonna look at really quickly for the purchase services would be. That, a lot of that, for example, is our SRO that we pay.
So it is people too, and I was gonna say that before Stuart found that, but any contracts we have from a personnel standpoint, we do contract with ESU, not a lot of programs, but SLP, for instance, we do utilize one or two of their SLPs to serve our students. Just from the standpoint, it's more economical to do that than trying to hire two SLPs, and frankly, it's pretty hard to hire SLPs.
Yeah, so
anyway.
it's a lot.
So that falls, so there are people that falls into that contracted service as well. And do remember when this particular budget, I think, is probably more heavily from a percentage standpoint, the proposal, this proposal. When I take out grants, I took out grants, just so you know, that 5.7 million, whatever the case is. The budget that we're proposing in terms of expenditures is 84% people, which is as high as I think we've had in our district for some time. Now, I will tell you, as we present other proposals to the board this morning, understand that percentage is going up, because what we've done with a couple of these plans, we're not cutting people with these plans. And so that percentage is even going to be a little bit higher. And as Senator Jacobson said, I think school districts historically have averaged, we're a people heavy business is what we are. We have a lot of people to serve kids. Has traditionally been about 80% when you look across the state of Nebraska, but I think that's probably as high as we've been as a school district in quite some time. Would that be safe to say?
Right.
But again, that's taking out the grant. That is just your general fund dollars that's just with your receipts minus grant receipts.
And just to clarify, that's not because those expenses are going up. That's because as we reduce expenses in other categories, the percentage of our personnel in the budget's gonna increase, just because.
Right.
Well, personnel does go up slightly because their insurance costs are gonna.
So you're saying, but you're saying even from the proposal for July, that percentage is gonna go up in other paid B and C.
Yeah, because
we reduce.
the cuts that
Yeah.
we're looking at are not people related cuts.
Right.
They're
Which
coming
is-
from other.
That's good, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
That's why we
and
should
That's
be looking
to
first.
the speaking point from Senator Jacobson, that's in our case, 16% that we have, that you have some ability to have some control over, more so than salaries, benefits, that particularly with as you know, certified staff, we've talked about this time and time again. We're pretty locked in negotiation wise with the way statutes work in CIR and a raise that they're gonna get what they should get, obviously, but we don't have a lot of negotiation wiggle room as it relates to our certificated staff.
No, and the three big pieces are SROs, a lot in SPED, and as Dr. Rhodes said, it is people, but it all contingent upon what we need to service our special
Yeah.
ed population. And then finally, contracted services within our maintenance area to make sure that we maintain the 14 billion buildings that we have in the land mass that we're doing. So those are the big three. I was thinking it was our insurance costs, and that had to be coded in a different area, so that's a big concern.
Thanks.
And I think Stuart will touch on this, but insurance did go up 100,000. Just so you know, for the 24-25 school year. So we did see an increase with EMC on.
Right.
Was the explanation because of all the things that have happened all over?
Yeah, all over the nation, they as an insurance, had to increase it to cover losses that they were dealing with, as well as just covering across the board. I did survey other school districts, and the majority are with LCAP.
Yeah.
Even though they did see, as they mentioned last night, if you were in that, roughly a 3.5% increase in LCAP. 3 or 4 of our schools are still at our level that we pay. So it's not like they're way lower than us. They're, even though they only increased maybe 3.5, the amount of money that they're paying is in, it equates to what we're having to pay too.
Well, when we switched
Right.
over to that, whenever that was, 6 years ago, maybe,
Right.
the cost was lower than what Alacant was,
And-
even with the refund.
And Stuart and I did have a conversation last night because I asked him, if at some point he could provide us with some information just so that we can kind of keep an eye on our insurance costs, because it may be that we may have to go out again and, and rebid that and just kind of see where.
I think we will probably come to the board and have a discussion about RFPs going out for insurance at the end of this school year. I think when we ran the timeline this morning, we're at about 5 or 6 years that we've been with
Right.
Hub International. And that was one of the reasons last night Stuart and I went to Megan Bolt's session with AliCap. And then we have array data as well from like-size schools, whether you're EMC or AliCap, on the increases from 23-24 to 24-25 to see if the AliCap schools had seen that. But I think it's a market, and so those probably are going to be pretty close. Those two coverages as they go through. I think EMC it's still, I think in our mind, it's a similar product with AliCap. We haven't had any issues. Tanner's been great to work with. But at the end of the day, we need to be responsible, and so I believe that I indicated to Stuart, we probably need to send out and see what AliCap could do for us for 25-26.
I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad policy just to bid it out every once in a while.
Any other questions? So I paused the PowerPoint. We're gonna go back into it. So I'm gonna share this again. Yeah, so quickly. So, as Emily asked, do we have, some other items here as we talked through this, and we wanted to ensure we could give some proposals to the board. Once again, this is now keeping our overall tax request the same of 30.979. Now, when you look at this, once again, it's still having to go to the board to request additional property tax authority under LB 243, because it's going above and beyond based upon general fund and building fund to access 755,000 more in the general fund over. Even though we're gonna be seeing a decrease in the levy compared to where we proposed on July 12th. What we're saying is that, you know, if we wanted to keep the property tax request the same, then we would, have to access that additional authority at the board meeting so that we can proceed with this tax request. So giving that piece, you would then see, based upon a $200,000 house this last year, once again, it's at $2,110. Increasing, knowing our house may have gone up by 10%. You would see an increase of $27 this next year on Plan B. So that's, and Emily, was started to go through this, I understand, but it was really mostly just saying that, okay, if we keep our overall tax ask the same, which is what we heard on July 16th, then all of a sudden, you know, we're keeping the tax ask the same. The situation becomes, we would still have to talk about accessing that additional property tax authority for the general fund only. Building fund obviously remains flat and we decrease our QC puff, but because of the statutory requirement and property tax authority, that's where we be. So, in that, any additional thoughts moving forward?
So remind me on the 5%, is that something that we vote on every year, or is that a one-time vote?
Well,
Or
at least at this point in time, based upon the legislature, it's every year. If boards want to, number one, access that or not access. Second of all, some of the school districts that access the additional 5% last year, they didn't use it.
Right.
So they don't have to request that vote this year if they don't need it or are still moving up to that level that was approved last year. So it's all contingent upon school districts, if they use it or not, and then where are they at in the overall property tax authority calculation. So I'm sort of saying yes and no, Joanne, but I don't mean to be that way, but it's just depending upon a school district and where they are as far as property tax authority.
So that is, again, just to repeat, just making sure we have a good understanding. This is a total tax asking, that is neutral from 23-24 to 24-25. If you take out QC puff, just so you know what the percentage increase would be. We asked for property tax dollars, 23-24 general fund and building fund, those two that fall under the $5 lid, $29,959,757. Plan B proposes to ask for $30,715,601 below the $5 levy, general fund, building fund, just those two, taking out the QC puff. That is a 2.5% increase from 23-24 tax asking of those funds that fall under the $5 levy. Just because we were talking about percentages with Plan A. So those are the numbers there. And when Stuart and I met, you know, I was looking back at my notes from the 16th, and there were several comments about maintaining, you know, at minimum, kind of that a neutral tax dollar asking. So that's this plan. That's what we build into this plan. So if you look at that, that's a reduction in terms of just general fund of that 457,000 that we talked about in Plan A. So that's the difference in terms of revenue is about just with property tax dollars is about $457,000. And so, when okay, so what on the expenditure side, what are you cutting? So, one of the things we
My
talked about.
question.
Yeah, well, and we're gonna address this more as we kind of quickly get through this, but, if you remember from Plan A, we had built in terms of expenditures, $500,000 that would go into reserves. So that becomes a natural cut because in your immediate year, that is a non-harming element for your students. Now, this is the discussion that I think we need to talk about moving forward is, yeah, but what does that do 4 years down the road, 5 years down the road with some unknowns with
Correct.
school funding? We don't know really what it's going to look like in the future. So historically, and I think I made this statement maybe at last year's budget workshop, or maybe it was 2 years ago. Historically, our district has always been up against the $5, and Stuart can attest to this. And so we didn't have room to draw more revenue in to build reserves. Reserves have always been a bit of an issue for North Platte Public Schools. Part of it is the way the formula worked. And we were up against that $5 and we were never able to build reserves. So when I started to study budgets, and I studied a lot of array budgets in the last 3 weeks, I was looking at some districts that significantly cut expenditures and revenues. What those districts did, in fact, a district very similar to us, they ate 1 year, $3 million of reserves. That's what they decided to do as a school district with their Board of Education. They ate those reserves and didn't put a burden on. Now, I don't know whether within the formula they could have asked for more taxes or not. I didn't get that deep in it, but that's what that district did. They just ate reserves to the tune of about 3 million. Their reserves are almost kind of where ours are now. But remember, the other thing we've always done is as a district, and primarily it was kind of pre this valuation jump and being up against that $5, is we always had a line of credit. We did when I was principal at Adams. We did when I was the principal at the high school. And we sat around the table as administrators on 2 different occasions, making cuts with principals to make the budget work. It was that significant, 15, 16, 17 years ago. So, what Mr. Simpson has tried to do is give us a little bit to put in reserves so that we can build that up. Our main goal with reserves is so that we would never have to take a line of credit again.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we should go. That's the goal that we have. So, having said that, if you're going to eliminate some of those things, if you're going to eliminate some of the transfers and other funds, depreciation funds, for instance, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Those are pretty far away from the classroom, obviously, but it could impact down the road, future North Platte Public School District, future boards in terms of how do you maintain your facilities if you don't have the proper depreciation funds for track replacement, football replacement, and those different types of things. We have a lot of facilities and we have a lot of transfer funds that go into those specific depreciation funds so that we don't get to the point in 1 year that you have to come up with $1.5 million to put new turf on the football field. So, but yeah, that's what we'd be looking at for that $457,000.
And I think kind of an unfortunate but appropriate conversation for us to be having is that we have recognized that our enrollment is down and pretty significantly in a lot of our buildings. And, as we mentioned at the previous work session, we're not seeing significant growth right now. It doesn't mean that it won't come, but we don't know how far into the future that growth is going to come. And so we did talk about, and I think it is worth the conversation to look at some doing some boundary adjustments and possibly, some school consolidations. And so I think even though it's a hard conversation and there's a lot of people in the community that are excited about the growth, just to be the responsible stewards that we try to be, that's something that we're gonna have to do as we move forward. So, that doesn't change this year's budget, but it will change future years' budgets. And so that's just something that I think we need to keep in mind too, as we're moving forward with all of this.
If we combine the school, how much would we save not having?
I think that's a great question, and I don't want to be premature in throwing a number out there because we haven't ran those numbers yet. It would be significant. So if you remember, I might have mentioned this in July, a like school compared to us that is in our array in terms of our averaging adjustment. They have a little bit less in per student cost, but yet the students they have is very similar to North Platte Public Schools. So visiting with their administrator a little bit and looking at their entire structure, they have one less elementary. Yeah, and I think when Stuart and I sat down, we kind of looked at that a little bit. We had figured part of their lower per student cost, because I even looked at their line items and their expenditures were very similar to ours in a lot of line items. But it had to do with lower personnel because, you know, we have some pretty small classes, particularly at the K-1-2 level right now. And so, you know, we could influx kids, you know, into some of those classrooms and, you know, I don't think we'd never talk about roofing. I want to make that perfectly clear. In my career, I will never recommend a roof unless it's not affecting kids in a negative manner. Then maybe we'll talk a little bit about it. But I think through attrition is where you save those dollars. If you were to merge, for instance, two elementaries together or close one elementary and disperse those kids to neighboring schools. I think I've made the statement, I don't know if you're aware of this, but this neighborhood right here actually goes to Washington. And McDonald is as close as what Washington is. And so I do think we owe it to you as a board to show you an enrollment pattern and to show you where these neighborhood families are at, where they're going to school at, and just by moving a boundary 2 blocks all the way around, what that would do from a capacity standpoint. And we do, you know, to the point of enrollment, I think it is very accurate to say we have about 500 kids less than we had 5 years ago. But I want to repeat this to the board. In option enrollment numbers have not changed that much over the course of those 5 years.
Right.
We don't have young kids and families in our community right. And the chamber did have some a study, and I think I've mentioned this before, that one of the lowest aged groups of people in our community at that time were birth to 3, I think is what it was, right around in there. Our kindergarten cohort is the smallest we have. At 236 or 238, something right around those lines. Do we feel like that's going to increase with economic development? Absolutely. We're not seeing that yet. And anything we bring to you would certainly have asterisks around it in terms of we want to look at real estate in that school district. Are there a lot of schools or are there a lot of homes for sale? You know, if they're not, people aren't going to move to that neighborhood school. We kind of feel like we're going to see the industrial park. If that housing development goes through, I think we feel like that is potentially going to be an area that Jefferson could see an increase in kids. Right now, Eisenhower's at 197 kids. I think the smallest Eisenhower's ever been. Now, there's a lot of development going on there with the apartments, and then there's going to be some single family homes that go in as well. So I think we feel like there potentially is going to be an increase out in the northwest part of our community as well. But the inner, when you look at Cody, Washington, kind of in there, there just aren't a lot of homes for sale. So I don't know,
Well,
you
and I
know,
think those of us that live in those, about my, and they're mostly retired
yeah,
individuals or people whose children have left the home. So unless they relocate to some of these
Yeah,
newer
yes.
builds and young families move in, there's not gonna be a lot of change.
Well, I think it's something that to look at.
My issue is before you start looking at that stuff, you need to get into the weeds of the daily stuff. We only do claims audit, what, twice in a row, 2 times a year maybe? And I am so disappointed in everything I'm saying. I'm disappointed in personal expenses. I'm disappointed in things that we're not looking at that we could be spending less on. And I got yelled at this last time saying I need to stop nickel and diming things. But you know what? A penny saved is a penny earned. And if we're not looking at our phone bills, that's one thing that I can say that's not putting anybody under the rug. We're giving people $100 for their phone bills. If you go through a business plan at Verizon, it's 45. So if we have a district phone, we save half of what we're paying people. And I get it, that's only gonna save a couple $1,000s a month. So that saves a lot of money. We're not even looking at that. We are wastefully spending money. I brought it up in the last meeting. There was a personal expense in our accounts. That's not okay. And that one wasn't the only one. And the other one was being taken care of, but it trickles down from the top. But if it's happening at the top, it's happening down below. And if we don't get on top of that, well, I'm not even allowed to say anything. I say something in a meeting and it kind of gets shut down. If you don't start saying stuff to people, they're not gonna buckle up. And I don't think that this is a you problem. I think you are on this, but I think you need to be on it more because I think it was really lax in the past. And unfortunately, you have to be the bad guy. You have to say, hey, this isn't allowed. And I have tons of confidence in you that you'll do it. But those are the things that have to be looked at. The monthly expenses that we're spending money on is ridiculous. The money that we're spending on food in North Platte at restaurants is absolutely outrageous.
But a lot of that, I mean, you have to really understand, you know, what's the grants, what's the
No, I
fundraising,
totally
what's all of
understand
the,
what
you know.
grants are.
So,
Because-
but also Angela, as much as I think we need to have the administration being, you know, making sure that those smaller expenses are being spent responsibly. The bigger part of our budget, where we're gonna make the real difference in property taxes, is going to be with the general fund budget, which
It's all part of the general.
is consolidating our schools.
But when we look at what our priorities are here, as a board, we've stated that our priorities are keeping students at the forefront. And so I think there's validity in what Angela's saying. I agree, your dollar amount is much bigger, so like instant impact on dollars, definitely bigger when you do something like that. But the impact that you're gonna have on students is also much bigger than if we say we're restricting what you can charge on P cards and we're working on reducing these costs. Yes, it stinks, it's uncomfortable, but if we don't provide pizza parties and different things here, we are impacting student learning a whole lot less than if we close a school building. And so I just want to make sure we keep, like, we've all stated that's our priority. We want to keep programs. We want to keep opportunities for students. And so without getting into the weeds too much, I want us to be asking those questions of, yes, we want to do this. And in an ideal world, if we were flush with cash, we would do this. But if we cut this, does it hurt a student? If the answer is no, then I think it's probably a meaningful cut. If the answer is yes, then we should think twice about it.
yeah, I think you bring up I think you both bring up a good point. All three of you. And I think there is an urgency around frugalness in the district. And you know, I think, you know, we can have a little bit more, that I can have a little bit more open eyes as it relates to those things. You know, we're already starting to work with, particularly with buildings a little bit on some of their expenditures within building budgets that aren't necessarily, you know, completely focused on student learning, you know, so, you know, there's going to be some guidelines, I think, that Mr. Simpson and I develop as we move forward with some of those expenditures. So, yeah, I think your points are well taken and.
And
we'll just continue to-
I also just want to add that as we're out in the community, I think we need to help people understand that as we're making these cuts, that's probably gonna put a little bit more responsibility back on them as parents. I saw just last night, there was a parent who again was complaining that we're not offering snacks at the elementary school level. And that was something that we had to cut from the budget. And so we need them to understand that that's an extra that we aren't gonna be able to provide anymore. And so thankfully, she was willing to go out and to buy those snacks from the local store and provide them to the school. But we need to make sure that that's being communicated in a way that's positive in our community so that people understand the things that we're dealing with.
Well,
So
they
what-
have to understand that. I mean, as an old parent. I would send money with my son or a snack. I mean, but they have to understand, do you want higher property taxes? Or do you want to save some money on your property taxes and maybe give your,
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I'm not arguing that at all. It's just that there's people complaining because their
Well, I
kids
know,
aren't
but
getting
they have to
snacks
be-
and they have to buy them now, so we just need
maybe
to.
put it to them like that.
To
I think that's
communicate that better.
a situation time will likely resolve, because I'm
Yeah,
sure the
it will.
people complaining are the people that were used to it being a certain way.
Yeah.
And when you get used to a luxury and somebody takes it away, it stinks, like,
Yeah.
I totally get it. My kid first went to a preschool where they fed him lunch every day, and now he goes to one where I feed him lunch. Is it a pain? Yeah, kind of. But I'm his parent and it's my job to feed him. So at the end of the day, like, that's a choice we've made. So
So
I think time will resolve that.
getting back to the proposal, so
Yep.
if we're looking at proposal B here, I think it was, I don't remember.
Hang on, I can share my screen.
The.
Plan B is in terms of the three funds that we ask for property taxes, would it be a neutral ask from 23-24 to 24?
And the way we're doing that is by reducing the general fund budget by
450.
450.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
where, I mean, where do
the
we-
building budget stays intact
Yeah.
at the $757,000 mark.
But
Yes.
both of these plans have to have the board's approval to ask, because it's above the.
This plan, yes, it would need the supermajority vote because you would be accessing, remember that 29,450,000,
Right here.
53,000 mark.
This one right here.
The additional ask would be the 509,000 above that, yeah,
And this is
And
plan
that's,
B.
plan B.
that's because there's an increase. So even though it's a neutral net tax ask, that's because there's an increase on the general and a
Yes.
decrease in QC. funds.
Yes,
That's what has
correct.
made that
Correct.
above our,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, so yes, the increase that Mr. Simpson shows up here is just on the building fund and the general fund. Remember, the QC pot doesn't fall under the dollar fund.
So that 500,000 in the proposal B, where, I mean. Because what it sounds like, I don't think anyone on this board disagrees that any cuts need to be as far away from the classroom as possible. So where, I mean, how do we get to, I'm not asking obviously for specific.
Well, I think with this particular one, that the fallback is going to be cash reserve. And I was pretty clear in a cabinet meeting earlier this week that the two of us will be scrutinizing every line item as we go through on a monthly basis. Before it becomes an expenditure, how we're going to approve those things. So is there a chance that we would still have dollars that would flow into cash reserve? Absolutely, there is. There's absolutely, as we study things on a monthly basis, visit with our building principals, we might be reducing their budgets a little bit based on what we might find to be more frivolous type things for staff and some things like that, because that does happen at the building level as well. And so, but the fallback is that the expenditures were built with that $500,000 that would actually go into cash reserve. So you always have that as a fallback. And remember, the way the property taxes come in, you might say, well, that seems silly to do if you don't want a line of credit. I would venture to say, even if the board would say, Plan A is great, that's what we want to do, we want to build the cash reserve, we want even more money in the cash reserve. The way taxes come in, you're probably still gonna have a line of credit in January or February.
Right, because of what's come in, because
Just
being
because
this tax-
this doesn't start until
Right,
25.
won't be built up.
Right. So does that answer
So
the
both
question?
Plan A and Plan B need a super machine.
Yes, correct, correct.
Okay, can we move to Plan C just so that we have time? I know Matt.
Yes,
had a-
I know, yeah, I'm sorry. I
That's okay,
apologize.
sorry.
So
Mhm.
we do not have one because we just wanted to have a conversation.
Well, we have a Plan C.
We do have a Plan C, we just don't have a PowerPoint. How's that? So noting that we have to be at 29.4 million, that is on our property tax authority. That requires us to reduce the overall budget by 1.7, or property tax request by $1.7 million. In that, part of the proposal is reducing our building fund down to roughly 300,000. Then from there, that leaves us with 1.4 million that we have to reduce in our budget. So as Dr. Rhodes mentioned, we've already been scrutinizing, and we've been working with Mr. Mills as well as the cabinet on staffing. Do we need that position or not? So that can we?
If it's an open position.
If it's an open position, yes, thank you. Obviously, we're evaluating our reserves, we're evaluating our professional development across the district. I do have to say, with our CEP program, we were able to increase it this year to 100%, so that reduces a little bit in our poverty program. So then therefore, we're getting all the reimbursement coming in from the state. Dr. Rhodes and I were at a meeting at Administrator Days, and they said safety and security can now be moved to QC Puff. So we're going to move those funds to the QC Puff. And then trying to anticipate our SROs, we have some reduction in there because of where the city came in with our.
Just how we
Yeah,
negotiated with.
how we negotiated.
Not
Yeah.
reduction in RSO.
No,
No.
we'll have all three, SRs.
Right. And then finally, we did look at all of our transfers that Dr. Rhodes said, we know that we still want to put money in there, because if we don't build up for, we could say track replacement or turf replacement, because those are coming up here within the next 2 to 3 years. We need to make sure that we have some stuff built up, because we do not want the board to be hit with a $500,000 cost. So if we can build those up, reducing those, as well as we are planning on reducing a little bit on textbook adoption, noting that we don't have a few coming up here in the next couple of years, but we will be evaluating that. Of that, that will reduce our budget by roughly 1.4 million, coming in at the $29.4 million. So we're not touching students. We're continually making sure that we have student achievements. And in that, we haven't touched the building budget, but that is something that is on our agenda as we go into our ADCO this next year, and talking with the principals, depending upon these adjustments, we could be saying, building budgets could be reduced here in the future too.
So with Plan C, the total tax dollars asked for from 23-24 to 24-25 would be a percentage reduction of about 4.1%. It would be a reduction of, as well, when you add all three of those together, it would be a reduction of a total tax asking of a little over $1.2 million. And so, having said that, I think what we can tell our taxpayers is we're reducing our total tax asking by 1.2 million. It would create a general fund levy of a little over 91 cents, about 91.4 cents. Your special building fund levy would be less than a cent. And of course, the levy on the QC puff would be an eighth of a cent or 80% of a cent.
Right.
So,
And you don't have any control over the, well, you do. have-
QC puff is,
QC
I
puff,
mean,
we just-
but I think when you're looking at total tax dollars, it is important to include that in because it's a burden on taxpayers as well. And again, so as Stuart said, you know, we figured out reductions in curriculum, we figured out reductions in some other areas, again, that are moved away from kids. We do feel like 2026, 2027 could be another big year for curriculum adoption. And remember, with our size of district, we spend $1.5 million on math curriculum during that 7-year cycle. And so, forgive me, I don't remember what curriculum comes up in 26, 27, but there is one that will come up. So we'd be lowering basically the transfers, all the transfers we have into the specific depreciation funds, we've cut by 50%. Right, Stuart, am I saying that correctly?
Right.
It amounts to about between $375,000 and $400,000 worth of savings is about where that ends up.
But going,
And I said professional development, we're cutting another 200,000 out. Remember, we cut out 600,000 a year ago
yes,
out of professional development. So we've really cut that down. I will say this, with our new PLC calendar, the professional development is really embedded into the culture that we want to place across the district. But we're talking about external travel again. We're talking about what is the threshold to go to a workshop? Should it be, you can't spend more than $1,250 with room reservation, with registration, with travel, with reimbursement for travel. So we're having those discussions as well. I think we feel like professionally, we're in a different place as a district where we're embedding that into our everyday culture, that we're all about getting better as we collaborate together. So we don't necessarily we're not contracting with somebody else to come in and provide those professional development
It's more
services.
organic
Correct.
within
Correct.
your
Yeah.
own area.
So I will tell you this from my standpoint, whether it's worth anything or not. All three of these plans will be good for kids. I firmly believe that for the 24-25 school year. I think Plan B creates a little bit of angst 4 or 5 years down the road. I think Plan C, I think you're back at the table next year talking about budget, the year after to make some decisions. We don't know what school funding is going to look like.
can I
So,
comment?
yeah,
on that?
yeah, sure.
So you're talking about school, Dr. Rhodes mentioned school funding and this is a good lead in. I made a comment about, you know, CEP and that's going to reduce a little bit on our poverty. As I'm looking at our poverty now moving forward, yes, we have a little bit, but we don't have the growth as much anymore. So we had that beginning discussion right at the start in regards to state aid, and Emily asked the question about it. Is, okay, we have not as much, and I try to get as much as I can into poverty. But if we don't see that $1.2 million increase, but we saw an 8% increase in valuation, that equates to, once again, decrease in state aid because once again, the TIOSA formula puts more pressure upon our local patrons, which means less state aid coming in, which as we talked about Plan B or Plan C, noting that all of a sudden, you know, one could push it off for a couple, 2-3 years. Plan C will basically have this conversation next year because then all of a sudden we're going to see more decreases in revenue coming into the school.
Gotcha.
So we have now 13 minutes left. Matt is going to run at it. What comments now about the direction of where you would like us to go to build a budget?
Or any comments
Yeah.
that you have.
Yep.
I just have two comments, questions of things that maybe down the road we could look at. Not like immediate questions that need answered, but one thought that I had was those things that are on a rotation. For instance, curriculum every 7 years, our uniforms for sports every roughly 5 to 7, I think. Most of them fall.
Right.
If we would kind of do a look at what it would potentially save us to just extend things 1 year, for
Okay.
instance, if that, wouldn't have.
Curriculum.
So,
Curriculum means
So remember,
Right.
your
state
Yeah.
run, so that's an. easy-
but uniforms,
And
certainly.
For sure, and is every subject area with
That's-
state run, or? would
They
some of
they
them
have a
flex?
rotation for every curricular area.
Okay,
But remember, statute guides you on your 4 cores,
Right.
and so.
Which are the 4 most expensive.
Yes, absolutely.
But
Yes,
you
you
could
are correct there.
potentially have
Right.
some, on some of the other.
Yeah, so for
Regular
instance,
stuff.
fine arts, we talked about that at cabinet on Monday, that fine arts has not updated their curriculum in
I think
12, 15
yeah,
years or
something
something
like
like
that,
that. And when you take all fine arts, that could be an expensive proposal by the time you think about music and art and everything that kind of falls in there. So, yeah, but there are, I mean, mainly, I think what we've done, and I think it is a credit very much to Dr. Hanson, was to really pay attention to the 4 big areas, those 4 core curriculars, and make sure that what we have for resources matches what we're adopting as a board in terms of those standards that come from the state level. But so to answer your question, we do have curriculums that we have not updated in years and years and
Sure.
years. The 4 we pay attention to on a 7-year cycle right now, are the
Yeah,
core,
those ones
core curriculum.
you're stuck.
Yeah.
Yes, totally
Yeah.
get that. And then my only other thought, just as food for thought moving forward, is considering different ways that we might be able to increase revenue. And just whether that could be potentially our extracurriculars and activities, or whether, I don't know exactly, like, I don't have a thought in my mind of what that looks like, but obviously anytime you're talking about cash flow, there's the outs and the ins, so if we could increase the ins, that would be very helpful.
One of the things that I'll mention there too is that Dr. Rose and Matt and I have had a conversation, and we're going to have a little bit more of a conversation too about potentially what it could look like if we had a stronger relationship with the foundation. They do a really great job for us, but there are definitely some things that could be done better there. And so we're going to continue to have those conversations and see if we can't make some improvements there.
So what are you gonna want? What do you want? Like something to each one of us?
I'll just
One of
add.
these plans. that
So we're gonna have the 5 votes to move forward with Plan B, or shall we go with Plan C? Bottom line.
I think the concern we have is that we have to publish these things, we have.
Right.
I mean, we have a timeline, as we saw, where we need to have these things finalized, and as we're learning,
And
it's taking longer to publish, so.
Yeah,
getting-
that really is the
That puts some pressure.
crux of it.
So we could, we could have a further discussion at the committee of the whole, but the thing is that then if anything, you would put it off past the 9th, you could have
I
another
don't think
special
you can do
board
that
meeting.
in order, I think, to get everything done on your timelines.
Well, it would,
It would be a crunch.
It would be a
No,
crunch.
sure. You're putting it off from what we have normally done already.
Correct.
So I don't think that we can wait longer than that.
Right.
I
think what we
like the
got-
timeline right now, but the fact, personally, I'm good with the end of vote. That's me. Okay, you know me, I worry about reserves a lot. And I worry about down the road. 2, 3, 4 years. Because of what will happen if we would adopt C. I think every year, I know the legislature is going to do something, we just don't know what it is. And right now, they don't. And that was very clear after the special session. So I'm very good with that. Because I think it helps us not only for this year, it helps us down the road.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I have long-term concerns about anything more than B. I think a neutral tax act is extremely reasonable. You know, I think as we continue to go down the road, I mean, if we look at a neutral tax ask this year and potentially next year, you know, whatever it might be, I mean, that in essence is, so it's not increasing our tax ask. I mean, we're not increasing it like we have been in the past. And so to me, that's in a weird way is somewhat of a decrease because if we go neutral as we move on, or whatever it might be. I mean, I think that's a very reasonable approach.
I don't know where I'm at. I'm gonna have to keep reading.
That's fine.
If you're polling for votes right now.
No, I'm not. No, I mean, it's more of a discussion. I would, obviously you can't vote at the workshop, so we're not, but it's more of a discussion and where we'd like to be. I mean, Dr. Rhodes and I will continue to sit down and scrutinize what we have to do and make that decisions moving forward. We will work with Joanne in regards to, moving forward, but we fully understand that no decision can be made. It's just more of thoughts or perspectives in regards to.
Well, and I like the idea that under B, there's potential to build up that reserve, because it sounds like you guys are saying that even under, I mean, obviously, when we set a budget, we're saying this is our authority under this, but we may come in under budget on certain things, and we might be able to then use some of that to build up that reserve. I echo the concerns about the reserve.
Yeah, I think I will need to do some thinking and digesting, because there's a lot of stuff that we went over today. I do in one regard like C, just because it will force us to look at things a little bit more carefully than what has maybe been done in the past. And this is not directed at you. This was, I think, an inherited issue that there have been habits formed and things that have always been done that maybe just been looked at again. And I think that is healthy. And I think as we talked through strategic planning, that was a big thing that was discussed, was really reviewing everything that we do. So I think that could be a positive. I say that recognizing that none of us know what's going to happen in our community over the next 5 years. We could continue to see decreased enrollment, and a year from now, we're having a conversation about, changing buildings and things like that, which would drastically impact what we're putting in reserves and things at that point. On the flip side, maybe our enrollment has increased hundreds of students and we're able to get more funding because of that. I mean, I think it's important that whatever decision we make now as a board, we recognize that it's still super important that next year we stay engaged and having these conversations, because next year may need to be different one way or the other.
Right, I agree. Well, I think if you want to send me comments and questions individually, we'll answer those. And I think what we had decided to do is when we have a board member with those, then we blind copy everybody the answer or, the reply. So as things come up, you look at something, you have this question, why don't you send those to me, and then I'll work with Mr. Simpson to get you that information. But then we'll loop all the board in on the reply to that. But remember, that will be a blind copy, to make sure we're not violating any state statute laws or open meetings laws or anything.
And I guess just my final comment is that I do appreciate all of the work that each of the board members have put in. Angela, I do appreciate your questions, and I have expressed a lot of those, to Dr. Rhodes, and they have been able to have conversations, like he said, within the district of ways that they can be looking at some of the smaller expenditures too. So we'll just have to kind of keep an eye on everything moving forward, and appreciate everybody giving this extra time today to meet, and I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Nope, not on us.
Just, all right, yeah.
30 minutes early.
All right,
I don't know.
there you go, Matt.
He said, yeah, I forgot.
You make your meeting.
Minutes at the last.
Right?
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Have a great-
You bet, you bet, you bet. No, I.
So, yeah. Yeah.
I got back last night, I got the text, so.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Appreciate that.